Hello and welcome to Hawkeye Nation. This is HawkCast, your Iowa football, basketball, and recruiting podcast brought to you by Hawkeye Beacon and Rivals.com. I'm your lead analyst and host, Eliot Clough, at Eliot Clough on Twitter, joined by managing editor Ross Binder and publisher Adam Jacoby. Before we get started, make sure you subscribe here on YouTube. Drop that like, drop a comment as well. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, leave that rate and review and hit subscribe because you might be listening but not subscribed. So make sure you do that so you don't miss an episode here of Hawkcast with us. So we would be doing you a disservice if we started talking about anything but Jackson Stratton, the Colorado State transfer who finished Iowa's game against UCLA, 3 of 6 for I think 28 yards, if I'm remembering correctly. Some darts to Jacob Gill before the end of the game led him to tie it up, and now, according to Kirk Ferentz, it sounds like he's going to be their starter against Maryland. Well, he said that, and then he tried to backtrack and say that. What? Wait, what if Cade or Marco are healthy? So, Ross, you and I were talking about this before we hopped on. I'll let you. What was your reaction when you saw that? When you read, the article that I put together on that quarterback situation?
Yeah, I gotta say, back when Iowa was adding Stratton in the spring, I did not anticipate a situation where he was going to be a potential starting quarterback for Iowa in November this year. That was not exactly on the bingo card. But yeah, yesterday was interesting because, we talked about this during the bye week last week. I think we were both kind of resigned, I want to say, to Cade being on top of the depth chart and probably getting to play start against Maryland this week. And he is on top of the depth chart technically, but it sure doesn't sound super confident that he's going to be the quarterback leading Iowa out there in Maryland this weekend. And yeah, it definitely really feels like there's a really, really strong possibility we're going to get to see Jackson Stratton make his first start in an Iowa uniform, which again, not something I had on my bingo card at all when he came to Iowa this spring. So surprising, yes, but it's kind of just where we're at this year. Like it's just been such a perfect storm of quarterback injuries for Iowa at that position. And yeah, now they're down to the walk-on fourth string guy starting on the road in the second to last Big Ten game of the year. Adam, what were your reactions?
Yeah, it's funny because on this podcast a couple times I said, be careful what you wish for because, Cade McNamara would still be the second best quarterback on this roster. And, you want him healthy just in case something bad happens to Brendan Sullivan. Well, turns out something bad happened to Brendan Sullivan. Cade McNamara is healthy, and he's still probably not going to start. you know, the fact that we're talking about a walk-on who has certainly practiced his way into that same mix as Cade McNamara is probably going to start that game over Cade McNamara, and something that got mentioned by Kirk Ferentz in that now already infamous press conference is that a lot of the concern with Cade McNamara was his ability to play quarterback effectively, which is a little bit jarring, alarming to some extent, but especially because the first half of the season was Cade McNamara not playing quarterback to an especially effective degree, while Kirk Ferentz was at that same podium saying, "Hey, just give it time, just give it time, just give it a little bit of patience." Now here we are. It's like, hey, you know what? Now that we're 6-4, now that a Big Ten championship is sort of off the cards, and now that we can take a more uh prosaic look at the QB room, maybe Stratton actually does give us the best opportunity to win here. But the fact that it's even close, the fact that we are talking about an NIL, like the Portal Kirk guy, sixth year senior, Big Ten championship pedigree, this and that. And he can't separate himself from Jackson Stratton, who walked on from Colorado State, measly Colorado State, and found himself fourth or fifth on the QB depth chart, certainly behind four scholarship QBs to start the year. The fact that Stratton's even in this conversation is tough for McNamara. But at the very least, I'll say this seems like it would be a lot more bleak last year than this year. At the very least, Stratton has a QB coach who has a lot of experience bringing these guys up to speed in a relatively quick amount of time. Whereas Brian Ferentz, say what you will, and players have said what they will about him just yesterday, but he didn't really have that experience, that resume to back up getting QBs into some semblance of game shape, especially in a few weeks. So I'm going to be very curious to see how prepared Stratton is for this game. Eliot, you got something on your mind?
So when Kirk said that Cade has been cleared to play, and
Yeah.
then followed it up with, can he play effectively? I read that more so as it's an odd duality of the reality of the situation. Getting philosophical here. Um, is that he's been cleared to play, but can he play effectively? And that makes me think, so is he still dealing with concussion symptoms if he can't play effectively? Or is it just that, like what Adam said, is it just that he can't separate himself from Jackson Stratton? Like, what's going on here? And of course, there were a couple questions about Marco Lainez, who has apparently been cleared too. I guess Kirk didn't really say that, but he also said that Marco would be available. So just a really odd situation. And folks, guys in the media were asking about Marco, and Kirk didn't answer a single one of those questions about Marco. So like Owen Sebring from KGN Iowa's News Now, uh, both UNI alums, go Cats. I can say that because they're 2-8 or 2-9 now. Anyway, he's like, I'm just to clarify the situation. Would Marco be at the top of the depth chart? Is he behind Jackson? Who's your starter basically? And Kirk just came out and said Jackson's the starter, and just completely avoided the Marco situation. It's just weird. It's a weird scenario. Like, but and it's also, oh, we'll know who's ready Friday. I just don't know what. There's nothing to read from it because Kirk. What was the quote? Clearly cloudy. God damn it, Kirk! Like, of
That's
course.
not a real weather forecast, Kirk.
Right.
All right.
Well, I'm not going to take any of my meteorology forecasts from Kirk Ferentz ever again.
Yeah, you mentioned Marco though, and that's an interesting maybe wrinkle. But we talked about this right before the pod, Elliot. Like he was literally in a cast like a couple weeks ago. Like, and as far as I'm aware, holding the football kind of important for a quarterback. So, what is his ability on that front? Like, is his grip strength all the way back? Is he, fine? That's those are big questions, and I'm guessing he truly is probably just a true emergency option, and he would maybe come in and run the ball a little bit or something if they needed it. But yeah, the quarterback situation is deeply murky, and as far as the what is Cade able to do and everything, and versus the concussion symptoms, we have to assume I think that he is fully cleared from those. I don't think the Iowa medical staff would bring him back if he wasn't. So at that point, I think it really does get down to what you were saying, Elliot, about him not being able to separate himself from Stratton. And it's like, boy, those would be some interesting practices to have eyes in at the start of this week, right? To see what Cade looked like, and what obviously, led Kirk to say that Stratton is a legitimate option to start on Saturday yesterday.
And I think we have to go back to some of the things that you and I said last week, Ross, is that Stratton showed some encouraging things in his minimal snaps against UCLA, right? These 2 weeks between games could not be more pivotal for him. And Lester said that last week, and he made that abundantly clear that he would. I asked him, would you be confident are you confident going to Jackson if you have to? And he just straight up said no. And that's why he said the following 2 weeks were important. And side tangent, this is just another moment where it's like, thank God for Tim Lester, because that type of transparency we never would have gotten before. Transparency, optimism, like he's just such a breath of fresh air. It's crazy. Not only does he make the offense better, it's just a good presence to have. So for media at the very least, like players aside, but I think one thing that he said that's going to be not one of my keys, but a key this weekend is he had happy feet. Jackson had happy feet standing in the pocket against UCLA. That was indicative of the way he felt about where he was at in terms of playing, his confidence. Because if you have happy feet, you're thinking really fast all at once. It's a lot of anxiety essentially in the pocket. Whereas a guy like Brendan is able to step back, evaluate what's going on, take off, or throw the ball or what have you. Stratton's bouncing around a little bit, but that's going to be something that I'm watching on Saturday from Stratton is what do his feet look like? What do his feet look like? Is he able to stand in the pocket, evaluate what's going on, and throw the ball? Because we've said it, we've heard it, we've talked to people from behind the scenes. He can sling it, like, and we're not talking about Deacon Hill sling it. We're talking about Stratton can put the ball where it needs to go effectively, but at the same time, well, maybe not so effectively given 3 of 6, but he can put it where it needs to go accurately. Can he make the reads and make the necessary throws given the circumstances of the game, the situations in the game, right? It's not Deacon Hill, right? This fourth string walk-on transfer from Colorado State is better than the scholarship Wisconsin transfer Deacon Hill, who's now at Utah Tech, for sure. What I'm what I wanted to talk about, and I think we may have alluded to it last week too, Ross, is I I don't think this is a scenario for folks who are looking to next year to say, unless Stratton goes out there and lights the world on fire, to say this is an opportunity for him to maybe be a starter in the future. It's just not that scenario. Some people were likening him to Tommy Paholski, also not the same scenario. Stratton is probably a career second, third option, fourth option, and that's probably where he's going to be for his career. But he has the tools to play in this necessary scenario where you're not fearful or as fearful as you could be, right? Like if it was Tommy Paholski, chalk it up as a loss. Like it's just different, right? Stratton was set to go to Washington on scholarship, had to flip to Colorado State because Kalen DeBoer changed his mind and struggled at Colorado State. If he was a guy that was going to compete at the Power Four level, he should have gone to Colorado State, tore it apart. Did an excellent job as the starter, but he couldn't win that starting job. So it's not a scenario to me where you look at Stratton and you're hopeful for next year that he can be your starter. You hope that he can win these games. You hope that he can run the offense effective, like it's somewhat efficiently, and that they can get out of this Maryland and Nebraska game with a win.
Yeah, but what you're also really looking for is an indication that the next time a quarterback gets injured, because the way that Brendan Sullivan plays with his high octane, like got to be 100% in terms of athleticism, it'd be nice to say, all right, well, next year he's going to give you 12 to 15 games, but to actually have some sense of, well, okay, now we know we can trust Stratton. right? Now he has shown it on the field. And how many times have we heard from Kirk Ferentz, like, yeah, we see these things in practice. We want to be able to see it on the field. And so, yeah, I mean, Stratton obviously is probably not going to be playing for the 2025 starting position at Iowa. Yeah, that is not something that is realistically on the table at this point, unless, like you said, this turns into one of those, 450-yard games. But that is that is not really even plausible at this point. So, but what it does do is sort of cement Stratton as somebody who you can trust in these situations. And if there's a situation where he says, "Hey, look, I want to go to such and such state and see if they can use a starting quarterback like me," he now has a stronger opportunity. Having been in a Big Ten program, having been under Tim Lester, than anything that he was going to get at Colorado State, right? This is sort of a situation where the fit matters as much as anything. At Kalen, or excuse me, at Washington under Kalen DeBoer, Stratton was probably going to be a better quarterback at this point in his career than he became at Colorado State. Now, that is not to say that he doesn't have, some agency, some ownership of his own career, Eliot, like you mentioned, like, yeah, go win that job. And he didn't do that. Yeah, of course. But this is also a situation where he is probably now better equipped for the rigors of college football, of being that guy, and to, not only be learning under Tim Lester, but to be learning under Cade McNamara, to be learning under first guy in the room, last guy to leave, Brendan Sullivan, right? Like, these are development opportunities for Stratton that sort of go beyond what's going to happen on the field against Maryland. So that too really plays, this is a really good situation for Stratton's future, regardless of uh, uh, what it means for Iowa's depth chart future, I would say. Would you agree with that, Ross
Yeah, I
or
think
Eliot?
definitely. Yeah, I would agree with that, in terms of, this can be a really good thing for Stratton. And, you know, going back to what I forget if you mentioned it or Elliot mentioned it, but just the fact of having Tim Lester work with him for 2 weeks to get him ready is such a big difference than what Iowa would have had the last couple of years, with Brian Ferentz trying to prep a quarterback in that time. But also, I think this is just another chance to see, what can Tim Lester do? Here he is. He's got 2 weeks to get this guy ready, fourth string walk on. But he's a guy that, Tim Lester found him and wanted him out of the portal. And, we've seen what he was able to do in limited work with Brendan Sullivan. So, I think this is another good, interesting test for, what can Tim Lester do to coach a guy up in 2 weeks to get him ready to play quarterback.
So, Adam, you said it's something that Stratton can like put on his resume if he wants to go to somewhat state, whatever. And I almost made a Utah Tech joke. That's where Deacon is. But Jackson had a Utah Tech offer out of the portal and chose to walk on at Iowa instead. He had a couple offers. I think Utah Tech, maybe Abilene Christian. I got to go to his Twitter and find it. But he had a couple FCS offers, chose to walk on at Iowa instead. And so, little nugget there for you guys. But the other thing that I was mentioning, and Adam, I think you made a good point as far as the depth goes, because and going into next year's, that wasn't something I'd thought about, mostly because, and we don't necessarily have to get into this right now, but Iowa has to go get a portal quarterback, right?
Oh yeah.
Like, and you're thinking that either this portal quarterback or Sullivan is your starter, and hopefully you can keep Sullivan around. And so you've got a little bit more depth there. But who who's to say you don't end up in another scenario like you did this year, where you get three quarterbacks injured and you got to go back to Stratton? That would be we're living in the wrong timeline if that's what happens next year. But like you said, I think these reps in game are invaluable, just like these reps with Lester over the 2 weeks are invaluable. One other quick thing before we before we move on from, or I guess move on to the Maryland, I guess, preview. No clarification on if Jay Higgins is going to play. Everybody was caught up in quarterback and talking to Kirk yesterday, so we didn't get that clarification. I'm going to see what I can find out and get that on the board for our premium subscribers. So if you're not a premium subscriber yet, do that today at iowa.rivals.com backslash forward slash. Is it forward slash? Somebody commented and said it's forward slash.
I think it is forward
I think
slash.
it is forward
Okay.
slash. Yeah.
I've been saying it wrong the whole time, and they were like, "Hey, dumbass." Okay, iowa.rivals.com / subscribe. So and again, that link is always in the description, so you can check that out and join us there.
You
So
know, in other injury news, though, Elliot, just to follow up, Higgins is a little unclear, but Iowa, it does sound like they're going to have Lachey and Addison
yep,
Ostrenga available, which is another good thing for Stratton if he's the quarterback or whoever is the quarterback. They're going to have, two very good options at tight end available that were not available in that UCLA game. Well, I guess Lachey played like a handful of snaps, but
right.
couldn't do anything. So yeah, having those guys back and able to play will be a huge boost. And to block, they're going to need some blocking. That's one thing I'm expecting. If we want to segue into the Maryland preview, is I think Maryland's going to bring the house on Iowa a lot, especially if you've got, Jackson Stratton at quarterback and you want to slow down Caleb Johnson. They're going to be attacking the line of scrimmage and they're going to make Stratton prove that he can throw to beat him, I think. So,
Which they follow the UCLA model. Iowa might be leaving College Park with a loss, so we'll see. But just to talk a little bit about Maryland, uh, weird team, like a lot of these middle of the road Big Ten teams, where it looks like a quality win and they beat UCL or USC, and then USC looks like crap, and then they beat Nebraska. Like it's just an odd middle of the road for the Big Ten this year, particularly with this Maryland team. Who, Ross, you found both of these stats. They're dead last in the Big Ten in passing defense and first above Oregon, Ohio State, Penn State, and everybody else in passing offense. That is a hell of a stat. That reminds me, as a longtime unfortunate Chargers fan, the year they were number one in defense, number one in offense, and dead last in special teams and missed the playoffs. Like that,
yeah, there's
that's
a
a
lot
stake
of
in the heart right there.
there's a lot of passing going on in Maryland games for both teams.
Yeah,
The Terps are good at it themselves, and opponents have had a lot of success against the Terps through the air. Which, if you were Iowa and you didn't have a fourth string walk-on quarterback, you might be pretty excited. This could be a breakout game for the passing game. But given the limitations at quarterback, I think you probably need to adjust expectations down a bit. But this is not the most fearsome pass defense, obviously. That is the worst, the most forgiving pass defense in the Big Ten. So that is probably another point in Stratton's favor if he's the quarterback. This is not the defense that is likely to force a lot of turnovers or get really good coverage on the receivers. So in terms of getting a softer rollout at quarterback and in the passing game, maybe Maryland is as good as he could have got as far as Big Ten opponents go. Adam, what are you looking at?
Yeah, the fact that Maryland has not given up fewer than 28 points in a game since September 21st when they played Villanova should tell you a lot about what the Terps defense has been doing this season. Just gave up 31 to Rutgers. Yeah, I mean you give up
with
39 to
Ethan
Oregon
Calliot
every.
Manis as their quarterback. Anytime I can
Right.
slander Ethan Calliot Manis, I will. He's terrible.
I
Shots
and I was
fired.
just racking my brain to try to figure out like who a good like historical Rutgers QB would be. I'm not sure I can think of one off the top of my head. I was like, so and so's not walking through that door. I'm not sure who would be walking through the door for Rutgers. I'm not sure who you want to walk through that door. But I mean, like, yeah, they gave up 39 to Oregon. Everyone's going to give up 39 to Oregon. But speaking of like, oh, are you kidding me? 48 points to Minnesota. Max Brosmer, 48 points. Like that's the same Minnesota pass defense that Iowa was picking out of its teeth by the second half, so or pass offense. So I the fact is you can move the ball on Maryland, presumably, and yeah, this is a fourth string walk-on QB, but this is not necessarily a Deacon Hill situation. This is, oh, Eliot is doing I folks can't see this. I can see this. Other folks can't see this. Eliot is clearly like looking at the schedule, looking at the stats, and is reacting like he's watching a highlight reel of cats getting run over on the highway. Like, and I'm pretty sure he's looking at the stats for the Terrapins defense. But Eliot, what is that reaction?
I was
Got really
looking at
dark.
yeah, I Googled actually all-time leading passer in Rutgers history.
Oh God.
Mike Teal from 2005 to 2008. You guys might recognize that name.
He played with Ray Rice. He must have, I
Okay.
think.
59 touchdowns, 49 interceptions. And
Ooh,
then Gary Nova is number two. He's from 2011 to 2014. Another name you
no,
guys might recognize.
vaguely.
73 touchdowns to 51 interceptions. Number three is Ryan Hart, 52 touchdowns, 52 interceptions. Number four, Scott Ernie from the 80s, 41 touchdowns, 49 interceptions. And it just like, I was just going down the list. The only name, it took me to get to number 15 to recognize a name, and it's Tom Savage. And it's not because of his career at Rutgers, it's because he was a backup in the NFL and had a stretch of like 3 games where he was good. That's all I got. Okay. I'm sorry. I that's all I had to add.
That's
Yeah.
our Rutgers bashing corner is done.
Hashtag Rutgers facts. I don't know
uh,
what I was talking about before, but it's
yeah. Um,
Just how bad the Maryland defense is and how many points they've allowed.
oh yeah, yeah. I mean the point is you can move the ball on them, and honestly, this is sort of a segue into what my key for the game is going to be for the Hawkeyes. And it's a little bit easier said than done when defenses are able to sort of crash the line of scrimmage on Iowa's offense the way that they can't necessarily do to most teams. But Iowa really just has to find easy throws for Stratton to complete. Like, even if it's just 5 yards, little hitch route here, just a little pitch and catch, something where he's got a wide, catch radius to throw to a wide target, just get into a rhythm, get the chains moving, even if it's not 7 points, just something where at the very least, he's got his legs under him. He's getting them to midfield. He's like, all right, we're moving the chains. We know what our script is, right? Just get him comfortable early, and you can sort of ride that a little bit as opposed to some of the sort of offensive blackouts that we've seen from Iowa and some of the sort of tentative play that we've seen from them, especially on the road this season. So that's sort of something that I'm looking for in terms of how Iowa approaches this game. How about you guys?
Yeah, so and I guess I've kind of gotten my key there too. So since we're talking about our keys for the game this weekend, I quoted Ross in our prep and said, "Dead effing last pass defense." They've allowed 20 touchdowns through the air, and again, this is something that Ross already hit, but and more or less Adam just did too. So much of this game is about Jackson Stratton and his comfortability. Can he take advantage of this porous pass defense and make something happen? And it doesn't have to be that 59-yard bomb that Brendan Sullivan hit to Jacob Gill at the start of the UCLA game, right? it can be that dink and dunk. Set him up, get him comfortable, throw that screen pass to Seth Anderson and let him try to make a play, or get the ball to Caleb Johnson out of the backfield, right? And then you can, once you see that he started to settle in a little bit, you can open things up, right? Against again a bad pass defense. And another thing that Ross mentioned, you got Luke Lachey back. You got Addison Ostrenga back. Jackson spoke to the media after the UCLA game and said that Jacob Gill is a safety valve. Well, now you've kind of got three in having Luke and Addison back. So that's big for the pass offense and for Jackson. And if he can get comfortable, if he can start to sling it maybe even a little bit, and if you build a bit of a lead, like 10 points, 12 points, 13 points, and things are starting to look good in the pass game, maybe even open it up a little bit more and see what you got in going into this game against Nebraska, because Nebraska is going to be probably better than Maryland. I don't know what Nebraska is after they've lost these few games.
I think if there is going to be some sort of a barometer for how well this offense is faring under Jackson Stratton, I mean, yeah, I mentioned that the key is how well, how comfortable he is under center, and that was sort of your key too. I think another barometer to look for is Caleb Johnson moving the sticks on his runs? Because that's something that Iowa was not able to do against Michigan State, especially. And a big part of that was because the Spartans did not have to respect anything about the QB position. If Maryland, especially with their porous defense, starts having to respect that QB position, that's going to start to open up those lanes for Caleb Johnson to not necessarily bust those big home run plays, but get those 10 yards, that 15 yards, like get to that second level with some of that regularity. So that too is sort of one of those, I guess, lagging indicators of how well Stratton's been doing, is just to see if Caleb Johnson can get loose on that. So that's something. Anyway, sorry, Russ. What would be your key?
Yeah, my key, I'm going to go on the other side of the ball and defense and see how does this Iowa defense bounce back from another poor road performance against UCLA. They kind of got pushed around. UCLA moved the ball on them extremely well. Only some fortuitous turnovers around the end zone kept that game from being really a blowout, laugher. And Maryland, as much dirt as we've shoveled on their defense, still does have the top pass offense in the Big Ten. They are leading the conference there. Billy Edwards has thrown for almost 3,000 yards in 10 games. So he is a very capable quarterback. He's got a great receiving option in Ty Felton, who has 86 catches already this season, which is a flabbergasting amount as someone who watches Iowa football, frankly. 86 catches, 1,040 yards, and 7 touchdowns. That is a remarkable, not even a full season worth of stats yet for that young man. And we've seen Iowa this year certainly be vulnerable in the passing game. 2 big chunk plays, 2 teams that can, string passes together and move the ball down the field. So I'm expecting an Iowa defense that, they've had 2 weeks to stew with that UCLA performance. And the last time they did, they had a bad performance, they really bounced back well against Northwestern. So that's, I think, a reason for optimism. On the other hand, the Maryland passing game is a lot more potent than the Northwestern passing game. So, we're going to need to see Jamari Harris and Deshaun Lee and everybody else in that secondary, I think, really have some of their better games of the season. See if that Iowa pass rush, can they get to Edwards and disrupt, his timing and force him into some mistakes? Because if they can't, maybe I was able to move the ball up and down the field on Maryland, but if the Terps are able to do the same, Iowa doesn't want to get into a shootout with the Big Ten's best quarterback when they're rolling out, no offense to Jackson Stratton, but a 4th string walk-on at that position. So
I'm
I
not sure even the Stratton family would be offended by that comparison, honestly. Because yeah, like Billy Edwards Jr. is putting up some really big numbers, and yeah, like those 86 catches by Felton, they're not more than Iowa's completions as an entire passing offense, but they're more than half. Iowa's completed 131 passes this season, 86 catches for Felton just by himself. Yeah, like that is a potent target. And I'm going to be a little bit curious to see if we actually start to see Phil Parker try to move Harris around and try to stay on Felton, or if he stays with that like left corner, right corner sort of situation that we usually see from him. Like, how hard does Maryland try to get their biggest weapons open? How much does Iowa respond, or is it just going to be, rely on your cues, rely on, Deshaun Lee? Does Iowa get good Deshaun Lee here, or is this going to be another sort of adventure hour at CB2? So I'm very curious to see how that one shakes out because, yeah, that is going up against an offense like this. I think that is going to be like the big test for this defense.
All right. Now, I have not forgotten score predictions. Iowa and Rutgers. It only took until the second to last season or regular season game for me to remember. Score predictions for this one. Man,
Did
these
you
are
just say
two.
Rutgers, by the way?
I did. They're both red and on the west or on the East Coast. Score predictions versus Maryland. Jeez Louise. Okay. These are two weird teams with inconsistent performances, and I don't know, man. It's an 11 a.m. game, so I'm going to defer to you guys. What do you think?
I'll
Ross?
go first.
Yeah,
I'll
go
go
ahead.
first. My first thought when I was thinking about this game was just given the struggles around Iowa's had around it has around the quarterback position and thinking the defense would bounce back. I was thinking kind of a 17-10 Iowa win. Having dug into it a little bit more, I'm not as confident about that. Adam pointing out that Maryland has not given up less than 28 points to anyone in over 2 months. That's a good sign for the Iowa offense, even with Stratton at quarterback. That said, I do think there's some potential for Maryland to make some plays in the passing game and score some points. So with that said, I have elevated my score prediction and still going for an Iowa win because Maryland does still just have one Big Ten win this season. But I'm going to go with Iowa 28, Maryland 21.
Yeah, it is. This is sort of something where if Iowa had its QB position shored up, I would expect them to win by double digits. But yeah, this is going to be a roll the dice and sort of see what happens situation. So is Stratton going to take care of the ball? Is Iowa going to be able to move the chains? Is Iowa going to be able to carve out a little bit of space against a secondary that really should be crashing the line of scrimmage on every single opportunity? So this is the big challenge for Tim Lester. I'm going to say it's going to be Iowa 23, Rutgers 13, just because I don't really
Who?
trust.
Rutgers.
Oh,
Rutgers.
for crying out loud. This is this is an epidemic. This is infectious. Hashtag CDC. No. Maryland. Um,
What
that
was your
trust me.
prediction, your score?
What's that?
What was the score prediction?
23-13 still Iowa over Maryland, not Rutgers. But yeah, that's what I'm going to go with at this point.
I am gonna say that, man, I'm still at a I don't know if a crossroads is the right word, but it's just a tough, it's a really tough one to call, given the road history, given that you don't know if Caleb Johnson's gonna get going, given that it's Jackson Stratton in quarterback, right? So I'm gonna say that because of those issues, Iowa does not break that 28 point threshold, but they still win. Caleb Johnson's able to get going enough, and Jackson Stratton does enough for them to get a win. I think they take it 24-20 in College Park. So Three wins across the board. Anytime that we've predicted close victories, they've blown these teams out. Anytime we expect a blowout, they lose. So we'll see how it shakes out there at Maryland this weekend for the Hawkeyes. Iowa men taking on Utah State in Kansas City on Friday as well. Stay tuned for our coverage of that. Adam, do the women play tonight?
Yes, they are going to play Kansas, who is most recently known, excuse me, in Iowa City for being the team that got the uh, commitment of Jordan Spicer, five-star prospect from all Iowa attack over the Hawkeyes. So I'm not going to call it bad blood per se, but they're they're going to want to take a little bit of a chunk out of the Jayhawks at the Sanford Pentagon in Sioux Falls. So looking forward to that game, and that is tonight, Wednesday night. So coverage will be on Hawkeye Beacon for that.
There you go. We will wrap it up here. We appreciate you tuning into this episode of HawkCast. Before you go, make sure you drop that like, drop that comment. What is your score prediction versus Maryland? They're not playing Rutgers. They're playing Maryland this weekend. Drop that in the comments here on YouTube. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, leave that a rate and review. And of course, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss an episode. You can join us at iowa.rivals.com/subscribe today. That way you can get all of our premium content from recruiting, behind the scenes with men's basketball, women's basketball, and football. And we'd love to have you there on the premium boards as well. That link is always in the description right there, so you can grab that there. Adam, did you have something you wanted to add?
Yeah, I Libby Fandel from Cedar Rapids is the KU commit. Jordan Spicer was KSU. Just wanted to make sure that people were not going to be in the comments being like, this guy doesn't know anything. No, no. It Fandel. So yeah, that's all.
Okay, got it. Neither of them are ending up at Iowa, so that's what do you do? Anyway, for now, I am Eliot Clough at Eliot Clough on Twitter, joined by Ross Binder and Adam Jacoby. We will see you next time.